What makes someone so much better at jumping, a similar body weight athlete with a similar back squat? Is it just the speed of their nervous system? Is it
powerlifters? Usually, they can't really jump. Why can someone else with lower peak force isometrically jump higher and express more?
what are some good ways to analyze ability for someone to actually move and run quickly? And then what are those tests showing us that individuals could work on inside the weight room?
The two different sort of phases of running, right? The acceleration phase and a max velocity phase. So
we're going to go into cutting edge sports performance research, and we're going to start right now. So we're doing a podcast with Jacob Goodin, one of the best premier sports performance researchers on the planet. And we're going to go through all the different things around research and then how we can take research as coaches and even as self-motivated athletes and apply this research to the strength game. So let's start. All right, we are here with Dr. Jacob Goodin, sports scientist, professor of kinesiology at Point Loma Nazarene, and we are going to dive deep into a whole bunch of different topics around things like testing explosiveness, speed, endurance, strength. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Jacob Goodin. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks, Coach Miller. I'm happy to be here. Been looking forward to it. And I will say that it's an honor to be on this podcast. I started following you guys early on, and you've really blown up, and for good reason too. So
I appreciate that. I was just thinking, I feel like we've known each other sort of for multiple years. I don't know the first time that we like messaged, but then meeting you last year, that was it. It's just cool to take like the internet world into person and actually be like, oh shoot, you're a human being.
Yeah. You're bigger in person even than on the camera.
Get out of here.
No, it was cool when we presented together, and I was like telling my wife, I was like, I'm going to try not to fangirl right now, but I'm pretty pumped. So that was fun.
And what's funny is that I presented at that on endurance, and dude, I was thinking back because they had messaged me about another presentation, and I presented on endurance, and I'm like, you should have been the one on endurance, and I feel like I should have been doing something on like explosiveness or strength. So I think it's funny, like there, and actually, I will even say this. This is a good segue. Is in that presentation, I really struggled myself on linking, the physiology and the things of the adaptations that occur with the actions over here. And it's like trying to learn the science behind how like certain types of training can create these adaptations and how to test for those possible deficits. And then at the same time, I was trying to teach it in an applied way, and I did feel like I struggled with that. So I maybe that's a good segue is like, how do you what are some good tests or whatever, or good tests that you might be looking at in the realm of endurance or explosiveness and strength and speed? And then how do well, let's just go into that first part around the tests.
Yeah, for sure. So, in sports science, we differentiate it from exercise science, first of all, because in exercise science, we're looking at how does exercise influence physiology and biology, and what are the outcomes on things like health, and in sports science, instead, we're leveraging all of the sciences in order to drive forward performance. And so when we think about testing from a sports science sense, I think a lot of times people have in their mind like VO2 max with a mask on and all of these intensive lab procedures. But really, it's a lot more applied than that. And we often lean toward field-based testing when we can, as much as possible. And so avoiding the use of technology if we don't have to use it. So simple is often better. When we're thinking about what to test, that's more around looking at the physiological qualities, the key performance indicators, not as far as sport performance goes, but physical preparedness. Right now, of course, there's a sports scientist can operate in both realms. They can dialogue with a sport coach and ask the sport coach, how can I support you in your needs? And maybe there are some very sport specific things to be testing and monitoring, like player load or total distance covered or total sprint speed or something through GPS. But when in from a strength and conditioning perspective, we're looking at measuring physical fitness characteristics or fitness qualities. And we do that a number of different ways. You can be very general about it or very sports specific, but it's really a gray line or sort of a gray area between what is considered general. Is a no hands counter movement vertical jump on a force plate general, or is it specific? Because you jump in a lot of sports, but it's also just a very general human movement. Okay. And so when we're looking at that, we have to first start with a needs analysis of the sport itself. What are the key limiters of the sport? What are the movement characteristics and qualities? What are the metabolic factors associated with it, right? Which of the energy systems is predominant? Work to rest ratios. And then extrapolating from that, we also then go to the athlete. What's the athlete's injury history, or perhaps the team? What's their level of preparedness currently, their level of competition? Um, what have we previously identified as something that we need to work on? And then, of course, what resources do we have available? And so I'm being very general, and it's that type of answer of it depends. But when we're looking at how to test quickly and efficiently, we have to choose tests that have a high face validity, right? So the athlete understands what we're trying to test them for, and we can explain that to them. And oftentimes we do use some sophisticated technology, which is becoming more ubiquitous, like force plates, like velocity-based training. And so, for me, when I'm testing athletes, whether they're endurance, whether they're power, strength power, repeat sort of speed endurance, like team sport athletes, we're actually typically testing them in a very similar way. Because the general physical fitness qualities, all athletes need them. It's just different doses or different magnitudes, right? And so, an endurance athlete we still want to know their strength and power. We still want to know how explosive they are. What's the health and status of their stretch shortening cycle, just like we would in a soccer athlete, just like we would with an Olympic weightlifter. Now, the specific test selection might vary slightly. So, when I was at ETSU studying under Dr. Stone, working with the weightlifters, we often did counter movement jumps and loaded counter movement jumps up to, upwards of 50, 60% of their back squat 1RM, right? Because that's so highly specific and valuable to understand the function of the stretch shortening cycle under load for those weightlifters. I probably wouldn't do that when I'm testing a runner. Instead, I'd probably do like a no hands counter movement jump and then maybe like a repeat 5 or 10 jump test, like a jump rebound test on force platforms. And so the methodology is very similar. The specific tests that we do, we can tweak a little bit to be sport specific. And then, the real nuance is diving into the variables, because that's where a lot of folks, and myself included, we get buried under 100 variables, and we just have paralysis by analysis, where we just get stuck in the spreadsheet and we can never actually operationalize on that data. And so I have a framework, and a lot of people have similar frameworks with different acronyms, but it's MEO. So measure, evaluate, operationalize. And if you forget the O, then you're doing it wrong. So I don't know if that fully got to the question, but
Yeah. Well,
it's a good place to start.
yeah, it's like one of those things where as soon as you said that, my first response, I have a couple things, like the magnitude of the needs, like the tests. A lot of the tests will be similar, but it's the magnitude of how much a distance runner might need specific strength versus the test of a football player in a strength setting. Now, the test might be the same, but the magnitude or the deficit potentially that you would be looking for would be relative to a comparison to their sport. So it makes sense. It makes sense. Now, the question I had was right away, I wanted, the counter movement stuff and the weighted test with the jumps for a weightlifter. Why were you doing those? I guess is like, what was the purpose? Was it like a readiness? Was it a session readiness? Was it just to see what they were capable of doing?
Yeah, so in that case, it was more testing and less monitoring. So we do use jump monitoring, and you can use loaded jumps for fatigue monitoring, like a daily or a weekly type of jump. But typically, people would do that, at least what I've seen and what's been published in the literature. Typically, it's an unweighted vertical jump, counter movement vertical jump. And for the weightlifters specifically, because as you know, snatch and the clean and jerk have such a reliance on the strength speed side of the power equation with stretch shortening cycle under load. the idea was to see where the athletes had the largest decrements or the largest fall off in jump height and takeoff velocity and counter movement time, time to take off, as the load approached higher and higher percentages of their squat. And so, theoretically, an athlete who is able to have a more gradual fall off, well, they have better power production at a higher percentage of 1RM. And so maybe we need to drive up strength. If an athlete has a rapid fall off, well, they don't have the ability as much to express force dynamically under that much load. Okay, and so maybe we need to work on more the mid-range on those powers, expressing power when they're fairly heavily loaded. And so there was nuances around that. And at the time, I was more of the technician and the grad student under the coaches who were operating their program. So I don't know all the nuances, but there's similar concepts around like team sport athletes, right? We might get them on the force plates, and we're not just looking at jump height, right? Because jump height is a fairly stable metric. And there are different jump strategies that athletes can use to achieve the same jump height. So for instance, with, you mentioned readiness monitoring. And so with some of our teams here at PLNU, we do daily or weekly jump testing. And we might see that by and large throughout the season, most athletes are jumping within one standard deviation of their baseline. Maybe occasionally they stray outside of that. And so if we set up a trend analysis, just graph it, easy graph. It sounds fancy when you say trend analysis, and I'm wearing glasses. So
Does that include tariffs?
it doesn't include tariffs. No, it's less confusing than tariffs. I'll say that much. I know enough to know that. And so when you graph it and you're looking outside of the standard deviations, you can start to say, okay, maybe they are not as ready. They're fatigued because the jump height is low. But the thing is, it's very stable. And so some other metrics, some jump strategy metrics like reactive strength index or the modified reactive strength index or counter movement depth or rate of force development, those are more sensitive to fatigue, because what happens is, let's say a basketball player goes and plays a game, full game, and they come into the weight room the next day or 2 days later, whenever their session is, and they get on the force plates or the jump mat, although you can't really measure those things on a jump mat or plyo mat. I think some of them can do RSI from a depth jump, but let's say they get on force plates and they jump and they hit, maybe their typical is like 30 inches and they hit 29. And you're like, okay, great. They're, they're maybe a little tired, but they're fine. But their jump strategy might tell a different story. Let's say typically they're very elastic, very springy. And then post game, when they jump, they actually, notice, because you're a good coach and you're watching the athlete, not the iPad in front of you, you see them dip down twice as far as they typically do. And they're really loading up that jump, right? Like gathering it up the way a little kid jumps. You ask your little kid, hey, jump as high as you can. They squat down all the way, and they think that the more time they spend down there, they're like gathering up force somehow to go like Super Saiyan and jump as high as they can. But you see the athlete taking a longer time. And so what they're doing, they don't realize it probably, but what they're doing is they are accumulating all of that impulse, right? The area under the force time curve to achieve the same takeoff velocity, but they're doing it in a longer period of time because their stretch shortening cycle ability is somewhat reduced. Their elastic qualities, even their contractile ability within the muscle. And so it's a different jump strategy with the same jump height. And so that's, one way that we can get a little bit more sophisticated with it.
How would you test a RSI without equipment?
Yeah, so RSI is actually very easy to do now on an app. There's an app called My Jump Lab. There's a couple others as well, but My Jump Lab is the best. Put out by, I'm going to butcher his last name. He's from Spain. Balsolabre, I think it is. And he makes phenomenal apps that he then validates and publishes the validation studies in the literature. And so RSI is a couple of different ways to measure it, but the most basic way is just jump height divided by time to take off or ground contact time, depending on if you get it from a depth jump or from a counter movement jump. Okay, so it's the amount of time the athlete takes in their counter movement. And it's a ratio of that to how high they actually jump. So if you have two athletes jumping, again, let's say 30 inches, and one takes half as long to do the actual jumping portion of it, they will have a much higher RSI. And therefore, visually, if you saw them jump, you'd be like, whoa, Dane, that dude's twitchy. That dude's
Yes,
elastic.
yeah,
He's got ups, right? And the other guy might be more of like a force-driven athlete. Okay, so he has to
yeah.
gather it up and concentrically produce that force.
Okay, can you? This is so. I've asked Christoph Kip this. This is a term that a lot of triple jumpers will use. Triple jump coaches, especially, will use this. They'll use the term elastic. Is
Mhm.
there is there like a science a scientific timeline? Because when you're saying he's elastic, I see like the yeah, we've got a 7 foot high jumper here, and when he jumps, it's just like I see it, right? I see it looks like a rabbit or a deer going across the field.
Mhm.
How is there an actual timeline on on a counter movement or on a jump that elasticity is tied to, and say in that descriptive, or is it still
Do,
more of like an abstract term? Do you follow what I'm saying?
do you mean like is there a cutoff of time to take off or of
Where you would
counter
say
movement
he's more
timing?
elastic versus he's more of a force-based jumper. Like this is that
Yeah.
split.
So okay, so here's a concept. I don't know if it directly is like a timeline, but there's this type of report called a quadrant report, and I believe so. Two of the major force plate manufacturers, Vald and Hawken Dynamics, both of which are great. I believe they both can do this. A quadrant report essentially maps two different variables against each other and then plots all your athletes in a quadrant. And so let's say that you mapped a more force concentrically driven muscle dominant variable against a more elastic sort of twitchy tendon driven variable, and you map those two, right? And so it could be something like time to take off, which again, the shorter amount of time spent gathering up all that force and generating it means, we would call them more elastic. So time to take off versus something like peak concentric power. Okay, and it could be scaled or it could be absolute, depending on the type of athlete. Maybe it's a weight class athlete. Maybe their body mass doesn't matter, so it's more absolute. Who knows? And so you graph those on a quadrant, right? And so there's a positive side and a negative side. You can either do, and typically what people do is they'll calculate Z scores. We're getting too statsy. We're going to lose the audience, but we get a standardized score. So you can go. Yeah, you can go like positive or negative on each of these, and zero is going to be average. And so imagine, oh gosh, let me just, can I draw it? Is that going to
Oh,
come
yeah, yeah,
across?
yeah,
For the audio listeners, just imagine like a a big plus sign, a quadrant, and a graph, and then you have dots along that quadrant, and then within that, you plot all your athletes. And so the athletes who are on the right side, maybe they have a really short, really brief contact time. Okay, so they're very elastic, and maybe the athletes on the left side, they have a long contact time, so they're less elastic.
yeah.
On the top part of the quadrant, maybe those athletes have very high power output. Okay, so they are more muscular. Those on the lower end of the quadrant are less strong, less power, and so they're weak. And so we might then label the quadrants. I'm just going to label them right here before I show the camera. I should have an overhead rig, and
Yeah, that'd be cool.
so
Okay,
let's focus, focus, focus.
there we
There
go.
we go. Is that coming across?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. And so, we're looking at, I didn't label my axes, but we're looking at the top being power. Okay. And what did I have to look at it? And the right side being a short ground contact time.
Right.
And so you
Okay.
can imagine that depending on which quadrant the athletes fall into, we can then bucket them into sort of different, maybe training buckets where, these athletes they have high power output and really short, brief
Contact
contact
time.
time. And so they're just absolute studs.
Those would be like
Just don't
middle
hurt them.
linebacker, running back type guys that are heavier but also twitchy.
Yeah, yeah. And then if
Yep.
you're in the lower left, those athletes are weak and they're not twitchy, right?
Yeah,
And then in the other two, it's like, well, okay, you're either strong and you got to work on plyos or
they're power
reactivity.
lifters. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Or you're not strong yet, and you're
yeah.
just naturally very sort of twitchy and elastic.
You
And
have
so,
power lifters up here, or you have the high school football player that runs and just like he's so explosive but so weak that he is incapable of controlling his body. Like
Absolutely. No breaks.
the think about we have a kid that comes in and I always yell at him. He's the most unathletic athletic kid, and it's like you can see as he's gaining stability from strength that
Mm.
he'll trend up towards that top right quadrant as you just described. So this is where, to maybe save the audience here, is based off of your test, the analysis that you just provided, and I would lump this in my brain. I have these categories. I actually have 4 quadrants of training. I think there's really only 4 things you can do in the gym, and I would label this as explosive based training. Do you see from test results trends like, okay, the bottom right versus the top right versus the top left, blah blah blah? Those results also correlate to specific movement patterns that we would associate with explosiveness.
Like jumping and sprinting,
So the
or
way,
like or
I mean, do
lifts.
you want me to tell you what I like? The way I do it is I would look at it like I would consider a clean to be explosive,
Mm.
a broad jump, a vertical jump. Uh, if they're doing a power snatch, you might be also able to look at like a counter movement, loaded counter movement, like a trap bar jump or something.
Hmm.
I would look at those movements and see the results of those exercises and then where that would place people on the quadrant. That's how I'm trying to
Yeah,
unite this
absolutely.
into an applied world, really, is what I'm
Yep.
trying
And
to.
so yeah, and so for those without force plates, like how do we group our athletes into these? And I think that's absolutely a great approach. And my clarification question was, I was wondering, did you mean exercises or more like sport specific movements,
Okay.
on the field? But yeah, definitely. Now one thing for me is that since I'm a professor and then I also run our sports science and monitoring program, I'm not in charge of the SNC, and so I don't always get to see that. I do get to see some sessions, and I walk down there all the time to chat. But also, we have a new strength and conditioning staff, and they're great. They're awesome. Actually, the head coach was one of our grad students, and he comes more from a tactical strength and conditioning background, though, and so the Olympic lifts are not yet a huge component of training. Although I'm hoping just with nurturing and influence and sort of education around those. To that they'll become a bigger part of it. But of course, it's not my realm, and he's got a super good handle on that. But yeah, definitely more. We see a lot with trap bar deadlifts and with their acceleration versus max velocity type stuff. The effects of those quadrants play out. But if you don't have the force plates, then yeah, like if you have your benchmark lifts, pick an explosive lift, a low load explosive lift, pick a high load explosive lift, pick a strength lift, and plot the athletes. I guess those are 3 lifts, but you could just put it in a table. You could even just make a little bar graph and just very easily, okay, this dude's high on strength but low in these other 2. This guy can express a lot of force in the loaded sort of power movement, but he's got to work on his unloaded power production because we would expect his jump to be higher based on his clean or whatever it is.
What's up, guys? Our podcast and our channel are sponsored by our own strength training app, Peak Strength. The entire focus of Peak Strength is to provide you guys with the absolute best sports performance app that you could ever imagine. We build out the programs on the back end. We take in all of these different decisions that we learned here on site at Garage Strength so that we can then apply it to you so you can improve your training. So if you guys want to improve your overall sports performance, head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store. Download Peak Strength. You'll get a free week of training, and then you can start getting on those gains, get those reps done so that you can become a champion. Now, let's get back to the video. Peace.
This is a big question that I get, staying on the explosive discussion, is like, what makes someone so much better at jumping? Let's say if like you have a similar body weight athlete with a similar back squat with all these things are pretty similar. Is it just the speed of their nervous system? Is like, what is it that makes them capable of recruiting so much faster?
Mm.
And is it all related to that? And what have you seen through testing with things like where you might look at somebody and be like, on the surface, these 2 individuals are pretty equal, but why is one better than the other at jumping at something so fast?
Yeah, I mean that's that's an amazing question, and it makes me think like the meta-analysis to sort of tackle that, or rather the narrative review probably to tackle that would be titled "Factors Affecting Vertical Jump Performance in a Range of Athletes," right? And so there's going to be so many that are involved, down from muscle architecture to, like you said, the function of their nervous system and the trained state of their nervous system, the neural factors that affect, like rate coding or motor unit recruitment and selective recruitment of high threshold motor units. And we can't see that. We can only test for the proxy of that. We can't directly measure that in our athletes, not yet anyways, and not cost effectively. We can measure things like muscle size and muscle strength directly, like isometric strength. And we can look at how much of their strength capacity can they use dynamically. So this idea of the dynamic strength index, where you have them do an isometric mid-thigh pull or any other isometric full body strength movement. And then given that peak force that they produce, you look at them in a similar movement pattern, similar joint angles, what they can express dynamically. And so let's say that you hit, 5,000 Newtons of force on a mid-thigh pull, which is, I don't know, probably going to be like 5 or 6 times body weight or something like that.
Yeah, it's gonna be
Maybe
high.
4 times body weight
Yeah.
at a very, high joint angle. So a really advantageous position, like the top of a clean. And then in the vertical jump, maybe you're producing only, I don't know, something really low, like 1,800 Newtons or something. You're going to have a very low dynamic strength index, which is saying like, hey, you're really strong, you just can't express it. And so I guess your question comes down to why can't they express it, and why can someone else with lower peak force isometrically jump higher and express more? And again, there's just going to be so many factors. I mean, a big part of it even is going to be technique. Like powerlifters, they can't really jump, right? Unless they come from a team sport background. But why is that? Could they not inherently jump, or is it a chicken or the egg problem where they just don't jump ever in training? They just express
They
force.
stay in hip flexion so much constantly that it's like
Yes.
it's hard for them to feel that if they're not doing it in their programming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. They're never, triple extending, to use an overused, S&C buzzword. But yeah, the sequencing isn't there. The motor programming isn't there. And then we know that there are velocity specific adaptations to training. So if you train to express force through high velocities versus through low velocities, you'll be more adapted to doing that.
I think that's one thing that I've always struggled with is like like a lot of people, like there's a lot of evidence around velocity specific adaptations, and it's like that actually brings up a whole nother question is like when do you think that becomes an important part of training, of actually factoring that into development of an athlete? At what stage is it like, hey, we need to do more velocity specific work, or is it something that doesn't matter? What's your take on stuff like that?
Well, and here we're getting into, the nuances and sophistication around training theory, and then the fact that training is so simple, right? And a lot of us sort of nerdy lab coat guys, professory types. Of course, we love to geek out on all of the sophisticated side and the science and the underpinnings, and that's really important, right? To drive the field forward and to provide education and to provide rationale for training. But what we just keep coming back to over and over again is, yes, there's something like a velocity specific adaptation. And also there's general adaptation across a range of velocities and a range of forces to just high output, high intent, heavy weight training. Right. And so if you're asking about like, when should we start to introduce, maybe some very high velocity lifting and or sprinting or overspeed training or what have you, well, actually, with the exception of overspeed training, all of those qualities from a very early age, because we know that myelination of the nervous system is happening, before adolescence. And so if we're missing out on those qualities, then we're potentially missing out on some key windows of adaptation for those athletes for, long-term athlete development. And so if you have a kid who, they're playing video games all day until they're 12 or 13, and then they finally get into sports, well, I would say, first of all, if as a parent, don't worry about it, because kids are super plastic and adaptable and like they're going to be fine. But how much better is it for the kid to be playing tag, responding to external cues, to change direction, to have this gamified approach to training, to be sometimes picking up heavy stuff, to be also taught either movement within a high degree of freedom sort of situation, like in a parkour class or gymnastics, where they just have to get around the obstacle course however possible, and with very few degrees of freedom, very constrained in, let's say, a bench press or a back squat, where they have to focus on technique and they have to have that sort of not grindiness, because I probably wouldn't have a kid grind out too many reps before the age of 10 or 11, but at least producing force in that constrained movement pattern. Both are very, very good for kids. And so, yeah, training is simple. You sprint, and you sprint often. You lift, and you lift heavy. You lift explosively. You do it all with good technique. You progress it effectively, and I don't want to say cautiously, because some people are way too cautious with training, but intelligently. You progress it intelligently, not just with load, but with intentional exercise selection, exercise progression, frequency, duration, all the typical like S&C meat and potatoes things, like that stuff works. And sports science is mostly just finding out and fine tuning, tweaking those little ingredients to hyper specific populations so that we can do it even better. But people get fast with, like, in third world countries with no internet connection, and they just do the things that make intuitive sense. And yeah, sometimes like we get things totally wrong, but like humanity got pretty darn close to, I don't want to use the O word, optimal. We got pretty darn close to effective training before the whole field of sports science. And really what a sports scientist does is we keep the roster available for the head coach. We keep people injury free,
Yeah.
keep them on that path. So, it's more about fine tuning.
Okay, you said something that I want to swing back to, but first I wanted to ask you, endurance field tests. What can somebody do who's out, and your wife is an absolute savage marathon runner?
She is, yes.
Uh,
It's, I mean, gosh,
like,
when you marry
what if
up,
she's on a
it's a humbling thing.
1:13 half marathon?
115. So yeah, she it's so cool, because kind of later in her adulthood, after we had our 3 kids, and she like started her own photography business to put me through grad school while we were in Tennessee, and after all that, she's like, I think I want to compete again. And so yeah, she's crushing it. She's training right now. I can say this because she did make it public on Strava. She's training right now for an Olympic trials qualifier, an OTQ for the marathon. I think it's within her grasp. She would have to run, I think it's about a 2:35 marathon.
Okay.
She did a 1:15 half, 1:15:40 last year. And yeah, she's a stud. So your question though, field-based tests for endurance.
Right. So my question with that is, like, how are you testing, like, anything specifically related to, so I'll just put like heart rate recovery after a specific interval, or how long you can hold a certain pace, or like how could somebody learn with simple tests and simple tech to be able to set up their training as efficiently as, just like the O word, I don't want to say that, as effectively as possible?
Yeah, definitely. And are we talking team sport athlete or an endurance athlete?
Let's say a true endurance athlete.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes it really easy, because true endurance and any track and field event, as you know very well, the actual sport, like practicing the sport, is a measurement of the quality that you're training often.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it may differ a little bit in something like throws, where in the weight room, your training is not always just light implements, right? It's also heavy stuff as well. But especially in endurance training and sprinting, when you go practice and you have a session, a quality session, you have a test right there, right? You go to, like, earlier last week. So Lisa had a session. It was supposed to be a threshold interval type session out on the roads. So it was something that I forget exactly, but it was something around 3 by 10 minutes at threshold pace with about a 2 minute just steady run in between, 2 or 3 minute steady run in between, something to that effect. And I don't actually have a current race time for her, so I don't know her like I usually use a VDOT chart from Jack Daniels training method, pretty old school, but like it's never done me wrong. And so
Mhm.
it's a way of estimating sort of fitness across different paces. If you Google VDOT charts, like you can find it. It's sort of correlated to VO2 max, but it's more correlated to velocity at VO2 max. And so, not everyone can get on a treadmill and get their velocity at VO2 max in the lab, nor should they. It's probably a waste of time and money. But instead, you could do, very easy tests like go run a mile all out. You could go run a 5K, like any max um, effort across any distance. You can just put it in a calculator online in these VDOT charts, and it will give you an estimation of things like VO2 max. It'll give you your estimated best time across different distances if you were to train for those distances. And so that's honestly what I use typically. We don't, we'll sometimes do a time trial, but the time trial is a race. The
So
other test that,
you
oh, sorry,
said
what?
interval at threshold pace. How would you define threshold pace?
Okay, yeah. So in a lot of training methodologies for endurance runners and most endurance athletes, there is sort of this 5 zone or sometimes a 3 zone model. And so in the 5 zone model, it can be based off a number of things: heart rate, lactate, usually a combination of heart rate and lactate and output as well. And so zone 1 is and all of these assume steady intensity, a steady work rate. So zone 1 is a rate at which you're exercising that there is no accumulation in lactate at all. Heart rate is going to be fairly low. I don't remember the percentages off the top of my head, but probably, I don't know. I'm just going to throw this out, but maybe I'm wrong, like 50 to 60% of max. Zone
Mhm.
2 is going to be below the first sort of lactate inflection point. And so for people who are just listening, if you just Google lactate threshold curve, you'll see these curves that stay fairly stable. And then they have typically 2 defined inflection points. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to kind of suss out where those are, but the first inflection point is right above 2 millimoles of lactate, like 2 to 2.5 ish, and the second one is typically around 4, as defined in the literature. But then any given athlete could be, plus or
Oh,
minus
yeah.
0.5, and so that zone 2 is going to be before the first of those little turn points, and then zone 3 is within that part of the inflection curve before it really goes hyperbolic, before it really goes to the moon. And that would be threshold or tempo training. Now, I define in my working definition threshold training as trying to run right at the threshold, right at the very edge. And it's very difficult. And so
So
typically,
where 2 meets 3.
yeah, yes. Well, no, more like the top end of 3.
3
I
to
was I
4 then,
was
okay.
thinking, yeah, right at 4 millimoles of lactate.
Okay.
And so there are heart rates that correspond with this, but they're going to be variable for different people. Like my her heart rate tends to be really high. When I was an endurance athlete in college, I was a miler. I hated threshold sessions, although now they're one of the biggest tools in my arsenal for training athletes. But my heart rate also tended to be very low. It was so hard for me to get my heart rate higher. So I ended up running too fast when I was going just based on heart rate. And so you can feel it out too. You can use the talk test, where if you're running at a pace where it is, you can still talk, but in like 1 or 2 words at a time, and anything else you don't want to do because it's too pressing of a pace. That you're roughly at threshold pace. And then sub-threshold paces like tempo paces are great as well. You can extend the duration, beyond 20 minutes of those. Um, and so, yeah, that's kind of getting away from testing. But zone training is a model where if you go do a time trial, then you can kind of set up an estimation of where your zones are. And I really like to coach based on outputs. So based on running pace, not as much heart rate. So more pace and RPE, but you could triangulate it a number of different ways. Pace and heart rate. You could go heart rate and RPE. Unfortunately, we don't have anything like a continuous lactate monitor yet, although I have been working with a company that I can't say too much, but the technology is definitely here. It's just not commercially available yet. So that could be really cool. Um, Yeah.
I forget if we talked about this when we met, but I remember uh, some of the cyclists, like some of the endurance cyclists. It would be so cool if you could have a continuous when you're watching like the race and they're in the peloton or whatever, and someone breaks out, and you could see the heart rate monitor on the
Mm.
screen, and then you could see a continuous lactate monitor, because
Oh, so cool.
you could actually make calculations then strategically. They might have people in the pit as they're driving, this guy just made a break, and this is what's happening with his heart rate and with his lactate. Currently he's got about, we know what his watts per kilo is, um, and we could estimate a break off, him degrading by this
Mhm.
point. So you got guys running math calculations all based off of when to push people, because you could, in theory, have these reads on people ahead of time. I just think it'd be a really interesting way to make the sport really. It's similar to like watching Formula One
I was
sometimes. Like,
just gonna say it turns it
yeah,
into Formula One, and then the fan engagement level is so cool too,
yeah,
because you could see, with cycling or with running or what have you, like someone makes a break and you see their heart rate spike. You might
yeah,
even see an anticipatory spike, right? As they're thinking about it, that could be cool. Like, is that fatigue or are they like preparing to move?
yeah.
I was telling my grad students the other day, we were talking about what makes an effective kick and how do you train for a kick in running. And I really like what Steve Magnus says about it. He is still an endurance coach, I believe, but he's gotten more into like authoring books and things. But
A
his
really good high
podcast,
school runner though, like
oh
absurdly
yeah,
good.
phenomenal, like four flat
Sub
or four oh
four,
one.
yeah, yeah.
Then worked with Nike for a while, and then transitioned out of that and coaching the collegiate level. But his podcast is phenomenal, on coaching with John Marcus as well. And I just really like the way that they break down conceptually and physiologically training, but they make it super understandable because their audience are coaches. And so when we think about what makes a kick in an endurance runner, well, at the end, let's say, imagine Olympic finals, and maybe you've been there at the Olympics, right? Watching the
Mhm.
10K, I think you said, right?
Watch it, and yeah, the 10K. Cole Hawk will throw in on the last 200 meters in the
That
15.
was a
Like,
15, dude. But
yeah,
that was
yeah. The
crazy.
10,000 was the first night. That was, I mean, the 10,000 on the first night was, it was awesome. That's where
Dude.
Cheptegei was in, like, basically in like 10th place for the entire race, and then like the last 800 meters was just like, okay, I'm gonna throttle.
Yeah, just see ya. And so, let's talk about Cheptegei. He's in 10th place. He's cruising. And so what's happening physiologically? Well, he probably, if we had a continuous lactate monitor, we may have seen his lactate levels were lower than the other guys who were there with him in the pack. And so he could sustain that pace with a lower lactate level. And potentially, when he dropped the hammer and everyone tried to stay with him, everyone's lactate went up, but
Mhm.
potentially his ability to generate and then sustain output with high lactate, so to generate high amounts of lactate, so anaerobic glycolysis. Lactate is a byproduct of that, and lactate is not really what causes fatigue. In parallel, we have hydrogen ions and other metabolites that are accumulating during the production of lactate. So lactate is actually good. It's used for fuel, but we use it as a proxy for the buildup of those other things that cause fatigue. So let's say that he starts lower than everyone else, and then they start kicking from 800 meters out, which is epic and legendary, and his lactate goes through the roof and it's able to go much higher than everyone else. And so that means the differential of what he
Mhm.
had available to give metabolically was just massively, outweighed what anyone else could give. So the lactate differential, and then the second part would be the motor unit recruitment differential. So as you're running in any endurance sport, you have motor unit cycling and motor units fatigue, and then other ones kick in, and something like running where it's step by step, you may have slightly different pools of motor units that are recruited, and as you fatigue, it's more and more the higher threshold motor units. Well, if through strength training and power training you have more of those available, right? You've the activation threshold for those. You've either lowered them, or your nervous system can hit the threshold, whatever it is. You have access to those, and because you're so efficient, you use fewer of them. You fatigue fewer of them during the race. Now your differential for power production is much greater as well. So we're looking at it from a metabolic standpoint, energy system development, and from a power production standpoint. So you have to have access to those motor units to produce the speed in the first place, right? You can't develop a kick just with long, slow distance training and with no speed training. It may look like you can kick, but you can't actually increase your speed if you don't have speed to begin with, right? And so that's one thing. That's one reason why I'm super passionate about, like, trying to spread education and awareness to runners around, like, hey, you should be in the weight room. You should be doing cleans and snatches. You should be squatting heavy. Yeah, maybe not 5 days a week, maybe not for huge volumes, but it's going to benefit your running economy, kick development, etc.
Yeah, and enough to have an impact on whatever you need on that last 200 to 800 meters.
Yeah, for sure. And who knows if Cheptegei is in the weight room cranking out heavy power cleans? Probably not, maybe. But they have other ways of generating
I
power, right?
I've
Hill
seen
training,
Yeah,
dragging a
I've seen
tire.
them obviously hill stuff, but I've also seen those guys doing squats and lunges and stuff on a regular
Mhm.
basis at the comps, like at
Yeah,
Worlds, at the Olympics.
it can
Um,
be pretty basic. I mean, even like if you go, I think on Netflix or YouTube, no, on YouTube, uh, Clayton Clayton Murphy, is that his name? Yeah,
yeah,
the marathoner.
yeah, he's been
Uh,
posting
you
more
know,
on. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. They show his weight room sessions over at BYU with the strength coach there, and they're excellent as well.
Mhm. I wanted to ask you some stuff about speed work because I've always found it interesting. Like one field test or how you look at like general speed stuff. So anywhere from a 10 to 200 or 400 meters, but then also I did have some questions on if you're breaking down someone's well, maybe let's just go into that first. Like what are some good ways to analyze ability for someone to actually move and run quickly, and then what are those tests showing us that individuals could work on inside the weight room or
And we're
wherever.
still talking about endurance athletes
No, let's switch gears into like,
generally.
yeah, generally speed, a sprinter, but also could be a football player, a soccer player, anybody.
Yeah, so I'm probably of all the physical qualities and development of them, I'm probably the least experienced with true speed development and things like that. But going back to sort of basic principles of testing and also sort of knowing the needs analysis of a sprinter and then the phases of a sprint. Well, now I'm thinking 100 meters, but you said team sport athlete. So at the very least, I would be testing the two different sort of phases of running, right? The acceleration phase and a max velocity phase. So here at Point Loma, we do a 30 or 40 meter sprint. And in that, we're getting 10 and 20 as well. So setting up, 2 or 3 pairs of timing gates. And then not all athletes are going to hit max velocity in that 30 meters. And so we don't currently do this, but it's more of a time efficiency thing. But if I could, I would also be testing 10-meter flies in the context of a training program that had them sprinting frequently enough that wouldn't be a risk for the athletes. Another thing that we do with our women's soccer team is we get their in-game top speed achieved with GPS. So, GPS and load monitoring is super valuable because you get so many metrics in a sort of a painless way, right? All they have to do is wear the, little vest and have the pod in, and then they just do their thing. They practice, they play their game, and then you can get those metrics without additional fatigue of testing and without additional, anxiety and time and all that kind of stuff. And so that's another thing that we do, and we set up, the thresholds for what we might consider high speed running for those soccer athletes. And then as far as speed development goes, or did you say speed development or testing the qualities of speed? I forget which one you said.
I said the both or both because I was like, okay, if we're testing and if we're breaking down their tests here, and then we come back and we see, how you laid it out really well, where it was like, okay, we can look at acceleration, we can look at max velocity, and then essentially, what would that tell you? Now you're the sports scientist, you're interpreting this, and then take that and give it to Dr. Jacob Goodin, who's now the strength coach slash speed coach. How do you interpret that into application?
Yeah, absolutely. So the result of those tests are definitely, if you really want to train speed, I would also want to look at the video, right? Slow motion video of the athletes. And so look at, why was their acceleration slower versus, let's say, max velocity? Well, maybe the angles are off, the shin angles are wrong, the projection off the start, probably a 2-point start, maybe 3-point for the athletes, low ankle stiffness, right? So we're trying to identify potentially the qualitative sort of movement signature that we see, and how that's impacting the results that we got. And so when we're looking at a bunch of test results, it doesn't automatically mean, like, if they have poor acceleration and they have high max V, it doesn't automatically mean we have to go do broad jumps or dead stop squats or deadlifts or trap bar things. Maybe that's not it. Maybe it's a technique thing. And so sitting down with those videos and with the test results is going to be really important. And from there, kind of like we talked about before with sort of bucketing athletes, it's hard to give 25 or 30 athletes on a team hyper individualized programs, and you need a lot of people to be able to coach those. And so having your whatever program methodology or philosophy you have, hopefully you're doing plyos, lifting heavy, lifting explosively, and with a somewhat of a variety of movement patterns with high outputs, mostly barbells. If that's the scheme that you're under, then you can very easily tweak some of those exercise selections, tweak the components of the warm up or the sort of, I don't know, prep sessions like before the session. Like let's say the session for that day is we're hitting, I don't know, like we're doing power cleans and then push press and then back squats to finish off. But the content of the warm up that prepares them for that. If you're warming up for 15 minutes, that's a lot of time to sneak in like run specific ISOs. Like what's the guy's name? He's from Australia, I think. He works a lot with,
Yeah, God, yeah,
what's his name? I said run specific and I thought of him.
starts with an N, Natera, Alex
Natera,
Natera.
yes,
Yeah.
Natera.
Yeah.
He has this whole thing with run specific ISOs. I really like those, dude. You don't need force plates to do them. You just get the outputs, right? So single leg, isometric, overcoming, also long duration as well. If it's an ankle stiffness thing. So to get back to like more conceptual and less nuts and bolts, you look at the acceleration, you look at the max V, you have the video as well. Between those three things, hopefully you're triangulating some where the deficiencies lie. And then in training, you just address those like you would anything else, right? If it's something like shin angle, right? Maybe that's a technique thing, but it's probably also just their horizontal propulsion ability. Although in the acceleration phase, and they're, hopefully if they're staying low, that's still kind of vertical because they're just angled towards the ground. So again, to me, that's like, okay, still do more vertical force production stuff in the weight room. And then as far as transfer of training goes, we're doing broad jumps, we're doing bounding, we're doing, standing triple jumps, those types of things to start to link those more acceleration specific adaptations. And then also like contrast sprinting could be really important as well, because if they're not projecting out and their shin angles aren't, what they should be, then doing something that artificially puts them in that position so they feel it, and then contrasting that immediately with an acceleration could be a great tool, right? So it's like the difference between, the analogy of the elephant rider. The elephant rider can like try to tell the elephant to go a direction, but the elephant's not going to go unless there's a path clearly laid out. Then the elephant's just going to walk down the path. And so for exercise selection, oftentimes I'm trying to think, what do I want this athlete to do? I could tell them to do that, or I could just set this exercise up in a way that they have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, contrast sprinting or resisted sprints are one way of achieving.
Can you define contrast sprinting?
Oh, yeah. So I don't know if that's exactly the correct term, but if you have like a 1080 and it's a resisted sprint followed by an unresisted sprint, and maybe some people do like overspeed and then unassisted after that, but I more often see it and do it with resisted and then unresisted. Or you could do,
so you could do a
where you like have a med ball and what was that?
Could you do a hill sprint here and then walk down and then do a flat sprint?
That's great as well. Do a hill sprint first and then a flat sprint. I really like hill sprints too for distance runners, going back to like motor unit recruitment and high specificity. Yeah, so good. One of my mentors in grad school was Dr. Brad Deweese, speed coach, and coach to several Olympic athletes, and he always talked about how hills bring the ground up to the athlete, and how in that early phase, especially, so important to do that so you can extend the acceleration phase, and so you don't have to have maximal force production to achieve the same angles to the ground, right? You can do it a little bit submaximally to work more on technique, because the hill provides the lean for you
Yeah.
instead of having to provide force, and so much force so that you can stay horizontal and low.
Right. Right. It's less fatiguing in theory than running at an accelerative phase consistently. Like if I would go out and if I wanted to focus all of my training on acceleration work, I would have to be running really fast on flat ground
Mm-hmm.
versus a hill.
It's
Maybe a
less
little bit.
it's less CNS and tissue quality fatiguing. It's more metabolically fatiguing from a muscle contraction standpoint, right? So it's easier on the tendons
Mm-hmm.
and the muscle tissue and the CNS, because because the ground's coming up to you and you have to use more concentric muscle action, versus on the flat at those speeds, higher CNS outputs, and there's I think more tendon stiffness involved and elastic return, and yeah, so more wear and tear on the body.
Okay, I wanted to go into some of the stuff a lot of people might know you from is the CSCS stuff that you put out on YouTube, and a lot of the information that you put out is to help people pass the CSCS so that it makes it easier for them to be successful in their tests, so that they're not taking 5 tests, they're just going to take one. They took
Yes.
your course, they've listened to you on YouTube. I wanted to go into some of that because some of the videos are really, really freaking good. And I mean, a lot of them are really good, but I also wanted to go into one, as a sports scientist, maybe what do you wish they did better with the
Mm.
CSCS? And then two, how could people who are learning from you, learning sort of like the educational side, and I don't necessarily want to, like, it's taking that knowledge and then applying it into a hands-on uh situation. And do you feel like the CSCS helps them do that as well? Like, is it a good jumping off point? So I wanted to see if we could talk about that from your perspective, because you do have a lot of really good freaking videos that lay out a lot of stuff on the actual test.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you. And yeah, definitely. That's, it's funny during COVID, when we were told with a week's notice, hey, by the way, you're not coming back from spring break. We're going to go totally virtual. And then a week later finding out, oh, and it's for the rest of the semester. And it ended up being for however long it was after that. That was really the impetus to say, well, I'm teaching this course and I don't want to teach over Zoom. Like, I don't want to teach these CSCS principles, these training principles over Zoom where everyone's going to have their camera off. And it's like, who am I even talking to? So I decided at that point, I'm going to record all these, and maybe they're going to help some people. And they ended up like helping a lot of people. And I just, kept tweaking and refining. And so there's like definitely some older videos where I'm like, why did I have background music in that video? And I get in the comments. And so, whatever, but super blessed to be able to have a part in the progress and growth and mentorship, even maybe of a lot of people, which has been really cool. And so, yeah, to your question, like what, maybe first to start of like, what can the CSCS do better as a certification? Okay. Now, the book is old, dude. It's like it's like over 10 years old, out of date. Wait, actually, hold on. I have it right here. What's the publication date on this? This is the 4th edition. And so this was put out in, oh, okay, I guess they revised it in 2016, but like, I don't know. Still, there's a lot of concepts.
Well,
Like, it
yeah, but
still considers kettlebells like a novel sort of alternative mode
that's
of
still
training.
almost 10 years.
Yeah. So it's pretty old, but I do know that they're actually revising it right now and working on the fifth edition, and so that's going to come out in the next couple of years. And so hopefully some of the things will be taken care of. I do think though that the NSCA, for all of its amazing just like opportunities it provides for strength and conditioning coaches, for the conferences, for the opportunities for research and mentorship, and like it has been great. Don't get me wrong, but on the education side, I think it could do a lot better. I think that's why my YouTube channel, like for what it is, has done so well. I think because it's lacking on that side. And now, again, I'll say that there has been some turnover, and I get to talk to the folks in the education sort of department and certification department a lot. And there's some new ideas coming up, and there's some like really great people in that organization who are making some things work, but they're big and they can't be agile. Like big companies are not as agile as individual entrepreneurs, right? And so that's where I think the education needs to improve, man. I had the absolute pleasure of hosting an on-site CSCS prep course through the NSCA at our Point Loma campus a few weeks ago with my colleague, Dr. Scolante, who's a legend, by the way. You should have him on the podcast to talk
I
about velocity-based training.
I would love that.
Um, and
You know,
anyways, it was a joy, dude. It was so fun. And they've enhanced a lot about those courses. But no knock against the students who were there, but a lot of them were very green. So even after 2 days of 8 hours of lecture per day, they were walking out the door, and I thought, they've learned a lot and they've put a ton of effort in while they've been here, and I'm proud of them. But they've got a long way to go before I would hire any of them as an assistant strength coach, right?
right.
Yeah, there were some for sure who were more advanced. Um, so that's where there's a new change coming by 2030. I think this is going to be a very big change, and a lot of people will have a big problem with it, but I think
Yeah.
it's going to help the
Yeah.
industry. And it's where, in order to have your CSCS, you have to have gotten a 4-year degree from an accredited institution. Okay. And so we just went through accreditation with the NSCA for this, and it was very rigorous. Like we had to prove internship sites and prove that there were certified coaches at these sites, and prove that all of our coursework taught not just the science and the concepts, but had actual application of like, do they coach a squat? Do they coach a warm up? Do they understand the Olympic lifts and integration of those? Where in your course sequence do they talk about testing? And where do you talk about how to analyze data? Where do you talk about, safety of how to set up a weight room? And it was a very rigorous process. So myself and Dr. Brent Alvar, basically overhauled both our undergraduate and our graduate programs for that. And I think that's going to be a really good thing, because part of the issue with the industry is that, you get people who probably shouldn't be a coach anyways, and there's no gateway. There's no gatekeeper into
Hmm.
it. You can just put wacky stuff on Instagram
Hmm.
and call yourself a coach. I mean, to be honest, you can even get a credential. You can get the CSCS. You can get a PhD. So there's still problems with that, but I think it will clean it up a lot when there is an accredited pathway to certification. And that's coming by 2030. So for those of you who don't have your CSCS, but you do need it, not everyone needs it, but if you do need it, if you're operating in the collegiate space, if your professional organization is requiring it, then get it before 2030, dude. Like, because, well, unless you have an exercise science degree, then you're fine.
It's going to make it way more professional. It's going to increase the value of the degree.
Oh, 100%. It's like, it's like the Flexner report that came out before the sort of modern educational pathway for modern medicine. And, back in the day, man, like to become a medical doctor, you just had to be mentored under a current medical
Hmm.
practitioner. You didn't have to go to school. You didn't have to prove your credentials. You didn't go to residency. You just apprenticed. And then when, I forget all the actual details, but I'm sure you could just look up Flexner report and its ramifications. That's when we started to get this robust medical training that the MDs that we trust, although I know as a society we've lost a bit of trust in in the health profession. Um, anyways, though, the actual training
Your
though, and the
lesson still
skill
holds
of those
true, though.
doctors. What was that?
I said your lesson is still holds true.
Yes, it doesn't change what I'm saying though.
Yeah.
And so a standardization and third-party accreditation, I think that's going to do the industry well. I think we're going to see higher salaries. We're going to see the fact that like you can't just like an AD can't just go hire any random person and pay them an unlivable wage. Um,
Mm.
so I think there will be good things to come soon. Those would be my biggest critiques of like the CSCS and the NSCA. But I see improvement there.
What do you think are the hardest, like let's say like the two absolute hardest things that people struggle with in the course and in even in your teaching?
Yeah, it depends because there's two. Like I could very roughly group wannabe coaches, and I mean wannabe in the kindest sense. Like in the future, they want to be a coach, into two groups. And one group is that group like they were athletes, dude, and they uh, were in the weight room. They were coached up on the lifts, hopefully by a good coach. And so they've been coached, they've been in that culture, they understand just intuitively almost. They learned it over lots of reps, but it's almost an intuitive understanding of the training process and of the dials and the knobs you can tweak and the switches you can hit on the dashboard to drive the training program that then they've like experienced the adaptations of those, and they've troubleshooted. I don't know the correct verb there, but they've encountered plateaus and potentially injuries and lifts that they didn't know before, and they've seen how their friend squats versus how they squat with different leverages, all of that stuff. But maybe they were a business major and maybe they didn't exactly pay a ton of attention in college, and so for them, the science part is super hard, super hard. But I think at the end of the day, those people are going to become a better coach, to be honest. On the other side of things, and I get these students too in my grad program, who they come in and like so well intentioned, but they never played sports, which I don't hold against them because not everyone had the opportunity to or was genetically gifted enough. But they also just don't train, and I'm like, dude, or dudette if
Dude,
it's a female,
I've
like
never grasped that. Like we had a
I
strength
don't
coach
get it.
with the track team at Penn State that came in, and to relate to this, we'd be sitting there like, yo, dude's name was Josh, was writing us a program. Maybe could bench like 135. It's like he doesn't even work out and he wasn't
Yeah,
an athlete. Why
yeah,
is he doing this job? How did he
right.
get in here? It was
It's
like
totally. It's
it
like
didn't make sense.
okay. I heard this. This is my first time trying this analogy out, so hopefully it lands. I was listening the other day to this old pastor that I used to listen to back in the day, and it was just this clip that came up was
Who was
suggested.
it? Who was
It,
it?
it was it was well, this is gonna like don't assume anything about my theology based on the
John
fact
Maxwell.
that John Piper was recommended. I love a lot of his stuff, but I
Okay.
also you know you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But super passionate guy, dude. And so he was saying in his closing statement, he was like, you know what I did? I had Chat GPT, I had AI write me a prayer, and so I'm going to read the closing prayer today from AI. And he read it, and I was like, oh, that's a beautiful prayer. Like that was really good. And so then he said, Amen. And then he turned to the audience at the congregation, I guess, and he said, now, what was that prayer like an acceptable prayer to God, right? And everyone was silent, and he let it sit, and then he just went off. He was like, no, like that is there, like that is the machinations of code. There is no soul behind it. Those are words. And he started citing scripture like, you honor me with your lips but with your heart, etc. And so the
Mhm.
point I'm trying to get at is, I think somebody who just sits and takes a test, who's
Yep.
textbook book smart but never lifts themselves, they may even be able to write a good program. But it's the same as if you just go and get AI to write that thing, but AI is going to do a better job. Like there's no soul behind the program because there's no understanding. There's no heartfelt, like, I've
There's no
been under the
connection.
bar. I've experienced a training block.
Yeah.
I've overcome injury. I've applied this to performance. I've felt sore for weeks on end, maybe. I've eaten appropriately to support, like none of that is a lived experience. Okay. And so I'm not saying like, I mean, you said before we got on the call that my arms looked a little bigger, and I said, thank you, best compliment ever. Like, I'm not the biggest guy ever. I'm pretty small. I'm pretty, I come from an endurance background, so I'm pretty thin. Um, and so you don't have to be the biggest and the strongest, but if you're goal oriented with your training, if you're tracking it, if you're writing it down, if you're following other coaches' programs, if you are consistently over time sticking to the program and making gains and testing, like your 1RMs, your rep maxes, your speed, your jump, like if you're doing that, that's a far better education than what you're going to find in any textbook. That's,
Dude,
that's what I think. But the thing is, you could also go like way out into left field on that. You might end up on the, what are those people, the fictional pattern guys? You might end up thinking that looks really cool and getting sucked into a cult.
yeah,
And so that's where, having a framework and having evidence-based sort of methodology, and to go back to the literature and the consensus of experience and evidence supported training methodologies, that's where it becomes very, very important to have that.
100%. I love that. I think it. I really liked you had. I really just liked it's, and the soul behind just doing the work is one of the best ways to get trust from an athlete. And I think the
Yes.
trust between a coach and an athlete has to be paramount for them to have success. Like, there's people who coach good athletes, and then more people come in, and the more people come in, and the reason why it can continue is because they trust the person who is running everything. And if they don't trust the person, like we used to sit there and be like, why am I listening to this guy? Like, dude would give us cues, and we'd be like, nah, like, dude, you couldn't even pick, you can barely spot us when we're benching 315. Like,
Yeah.
what get out of here. Now I have a question I wanted to ask you, because this sort of goes off of this. As somebody who would be listening, and as a coach, is there, I like to think applied, I like to think learn, educational. I want to just have, like, a lot of people will hit me up like, what are the top 5 books in the field that you think can help understand sort of both areas of the field?
Yeah. Good question. So, well, I do think the Essentials book is good. Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning. Another one that was impactful for me was Practice and Principles of Strength Training by Stone, and Sands. Dr. Stone was my one of my PhD mentors and master's mentors, and then his wife, Meg Stone, a huge mentor, and just obviously an icon in the sport world and coaching world. And so that was really good. Maybe it's a little outdated. I don't know when the last time they published an update was on that. Honestly, the book by Israel and Wesley Smith, Chad Wesley Smith, around, I forget what it's called, Scientific Principles of Strength Training, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I liked that one, the reason I liked it was because it laid out training theory, applied training concepts so logically. Like it cut out any gray area and was like, here is the formula. And I don't think that formulaic coaching is the best coaching, but I do think that a formula or a formulaic way of laying out training is a really good starting point. And it helps you understand the underlying principles. It really simplified sort of periodization from a just very basic, no one had to argue about which Russian guy did what. It was
Yeah.
just like,
Yep.
you make a muscle bigger, you teach that bigger muscle to be stronger because it has more capacity for strength. You use that increased strength and force production to now improve and train power. That's like, it's as simple as that. And now, of course, you get into like, well, should you do it all at once, or should you do it sequentially in a block style? And that's all the nuance. But at the very root, it just simplified it so well. And I think a lot of people, they see all this wacky stuff on Instagram, and some of it's really good, and some of it's not, and some of it takes too long to read, and you don't know how to decipher it. And so a book like that it reduces it cuts away all the noise and gives you the signal only. And it was like the reading level, not a knock on them, but the reading level was low enough that I think anyone
You can
can
just jump
understand it.
into it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Those ones, from an endurance side of things, uh, it's not a book. Steve Magnus, the coach, does have a book that's out. It was kind of like, I think it was like his master's thesis that he turned into a book. And so that was good for review for me, and
The
for someone
science of
without a
running.
background in the phys. It may be a great book, but more so just his podcast and hearing him speak on these topics and principles and connecting the disparate topics is so helpful. And so I'd recommend that. Of course, like I don't know how long ago I tried to read Super Training. I've been thinking about revisiting it and maybe even like doing a series on it. What else? Oh, Joel Smith. Joel Smith's book is which one did I read? I forget which one it is. It's back there somewhere. He has two that I really. Oh, I think it's called Speed Strength.
That's the
And like
jumps guy, right?
Joel Smith, Just Fly Performance
Yeah.
podcast. Yeah, track and field background. Pretty diverse content on his podcast. I really like his podcast as well. So, what I recommend to my students is I typically recommend them podcasts and YouTube channels these days, as well as, of course, like the research that we have embedded in our courses, and then the textbooks that are assigned. So podcast. The reason I like podcasts is because you hear it from the horse's mouth, right?
Yeah.
You hear the coach behind the method, and you hear conflicting things as well. You hear people tackling the same problem in different ways, and like I have a lot of students who come in, and I'll ask them what they're doing for continuing ed, and they'll say, "Oh, like, well, I'm going to get my CSCS, then I'm going to get this certification, then I'm going to get the corrective exercise, then USAW," and I'm like, "But dude, are you training and are you talking to coaches?" And they're like, "Oh, well, no, like, well, yeah, I'm working out." And then you talk to them, you realize they're occasionally exercising. And then so we clear that up. And then you realize they're not dialoguing with any actual practitioners until they get to their internship. We do that really well. But so then I just give them a bunch of podcasts and I say, catch up on all these podcasts. Like, go back, start from a year ago and catch up to the present. That's what I did, dude. Because when I was learning all this stuff, I had just graduated undergrad from an endurance background, and our coach is an amazing man, an amazing coach, and one of my biggest life mentors. But he didn't have a background in the weight room, so we didn't lift, and I didn't know anything about it. And here I was wanting to get into the field. I was like those people who don't train. Now, of course, I trained a
You
lot
trained
from
it.
an endurance side,
Yeah,
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 but just
yeah.
not in the weight room. So aside from my internship, and aside from like being there as often as I could, until they kicked me out, basically. Aside from those two things, I read every article on T Nation that existed to
Hell
that
yeah.
point, because that was the only way. There was like T Nation and Brett Contreras' blog and Eric Cressy's blog and Perform Better,
Yeah.
with what's his name? Who's the Perform Better guy? I should know.
Well, I think there was a couple. Perform Better. Rob Lasorsa was a guy in the throws that used to publish, but he wouldn't be like the super
No,
popular
it was
one.
the main dude, the dude who never back squatted his athletes after a certain point, and did front squats, and I don't know. Mike Boyle, that's who it was.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Yeah,
Boyle.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Duh, duh. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Those were my sources of information, and so I read like just to learn the terms, to learn like the
yeah.
different ways to set things up. So, anyways, I don't know if that fully answered your question, but if a young coach is not hungry for that information, I question to their face and I say, like, do you really want this? Because this is
I
your
hear that a
craft.
lot, though. I think it's surprising that it. I don't. It's surprising in the sense of like, and how many times like here's a great example. You listen to those, so you read a book and it's like, okay, sets of 2 to 6 reps is strength, sets of 6 to 12 reps is hypertrophy work, sets of 12 to 15 is endurance, and you shouldn't do anything more than that.
Right.
And then and then you're like, okay, so when when John Meadows was out and putting stuff up, I'd be like, wait, Meadows is doing like sets of 30. And then I get into bodybuilding stuff and I'm like, okay, Well, these bodybuilding guys, they're doing like sets of 5, but then they would do sets of 25 to 30. And we'll have guys, interns come in and they'll be like, I don't know why you would do sets of 17. Like that's just endurance based. They're not going to get any stronger. And I'm like, first of all, these kids are like 12 to 18 years old. Anything will get them stronger. Second of all, like it's not that cut and dry. But
Right.
if you aren't looking for other resources and other perspectives, you're never going to actually expand those things. So like the fact that you're like listening to a jumps guys podcast and you're listening to an endurance guys podcast and the people they're also talking to, you have an immediate connection to their circle.
Yeah,
And that's important
absolutely.
for learning.
It's huge,
So
man.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And the framework is important. The concepts are important, and the sort of scientific rationale is important. But we can't lead with those things,
Hmm.
because I always say the science is trailing at least 10 years behind the innovating coaches. And now, of course, most coaches like is 80/20. Like there's probably 20% of what we're doing that doesn't make the athlete any better, and then maybe some small percent makes them worse. Um, but the science, like with the reps of sets of 30, like you're saying, like recently there's been a ton of literature published saying sets of 30 are effective for hypertrophy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
bodybuilders knew it first.
Yeah.
The bro science, like I got back on Instagram a couple months ago, mostly so I could launch my CSCS accelerator sort of mentorship course and to kind of reach more people that way. So I've been trying to figure out what hits on Instagram, and so I was trying the whole meme thing for a little bit, and you see the whole science based versus non-science based coaching, and there's a lot of coaches on there who like to just label people they don't like, or they are too nerdy and maybe over dramatize the science of it. They label them as science based as a sort of pejorative. And that's fine, whatever. I take a little offense at that, because it's almost like saying, well, like, so you're going to be unscientifically based,
Right.
and so I prefer the term based, just like not science based, but just based, like be based, stick, like go back to what is true. And like, no matter whose feelings it hurts, and say like, hey, sets of 17 got these guys freakishly strong, and they're stronger than you, and you haven't tried it. So,
Right.
and there's a bunch of gray area in the science. Like we know, like those P values and those effect size and the samples, like they're probably underpowered. So this is a guide, and so is experience. So, don't knock it until you try it. That's more, a more based response. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where it's going with that.
Well, okay. So off of that, let everybody know where they can find your CSCS accelerator.
Yeah, no, thank you. So I'm in the thick of cohort number 1 right now. It's sold out. Actually, I had, like, because I was learning the whole, like, landing page thing. I didn't close my landing page on time, so we're like 10 people over
Oh
what I had
yeah.
allotted for. So the it's going to launch. The second cohort is going to launch in September, first week of September. Right now, once this podcast is published, you can go to my Instagram and either link in bio, or I'll have posts about it, and as well as direct links from all my YouTube videos. CSCS YouTube videos are going to point to that course for the waiting list, or depending on when this is published, the actual link to buy. The thing with the course that I think I like the way I'm doing this is every person who purchases gets lifetime access to the recordings. They may not be able to be there live in the recordings, because I do 2 or 3 times a week long sessions like this, where it's a few people online. They get to ask questions, but we just go through and I give context. And like you said, the soul behind the program, the hearing from people. So we go through the concepts and how to pass the test, but then I'm also giving like my experience and anecdotes and things that I've also heard other coaches say. And so giving so much context and drilling down. But once you sign up for the course, you have lifetime access. So maybe you're not ready to
Okay.
take it yet, but maybe after 2 cohorts, like you're also seeing the improvements to the course as I just continue to add every time. Um, and so, yeah, next cohort launching in September, and YouTube or Instagram are probably the easiest ways. I think it also comes up pretty, high in the search results. If you just Google Dr. Goodin CSCS Accelerator, I think it pops right up there too.
It'll be the first thing.
Well, I hope so.
Even looking at like ChatGPT or DeepSeek, the reference point for learning is like one of your links is like the top 3.
Yes.
So you're doing a great job.
Appreciate
Not
it.
only not just from actually doing a great job with the
Yeah.
presentation, but also from the business side. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I know nothing about the SEO, so that's
yeah.
you asked me about books. I can name probably like 100 business books I've been listening to the last year or so.
Okay, give me
So
2
that's a
business
whole nother
books because
world.
a lot of people ask that too. A lot of people will ask about that.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so well, I mean, recently for like financials, I read Profit First. That was the latest one, but that's more how to set up your banking system. That's not exciting. Um, uh, Hormozi's books are really good. Anyone in the space probably knows who Alex Hormozi is because he's everywhere. But honestly, man, his podcast recently has been putting out him just workshopping businesses with small business owners and medium-sized business owners. So helpful. It's like listening to a coach just, go through a program and break it down. Very, very helpful. And so he has a couple different books, and a third he's publishing $100 million offers and $100 million leads. Those have been really good. Uh, Pat Bet-David's book,
Yeah.
PBT, is really good about entrepreneurship. The E Myth Revisited, really good. I forget the author though. Um, uh, who's There's another lady who puts out some stuff around making courses, but that's very specific to my niche. Yeah, those are a few just off the top of my head.
That's great. Profit First to me a lot of stuff with Michalowicz is like learning pieces here, getting these tools, and then Hormozi's like the big system aspect of like, okay, piece this in here, okay, piece this in here, and he has his own frameworks that makes it a little bit easier to piece those tools in. So
Mhm.
dude, all this stuff's it's similar to just training. It's like the
Yeah,
same stuff.
it's training content.
Yeah.
It's tweaking it for outcomes, measuring them. What I like about Hormozy's stuff is the way he says it makes me feel like a big wuss just for like not starting something or like thinking it's complex. He's like, no, just do it. Just do
Yeah.
more. Just do
Yeah.
like, and the hustle culture stuff, like there's some, not that I want to go like just hustle 18 hours a day. I have a family and want to do things with free time, but it's around the idea of we think a lot of things are very hard until we just try it. Like,
Mhm.
like you said, it's same with the weight room. Like people think the Olympic lifts are hard. Like just go do them for 6 weeks, like do them,
Yep.
film your lift and critique it and like watch, watch Garage Strength. And the other good one would be Catalyst Athletics on YouTube
Yeah.
with, what's his face?
Greg Everett.
Everett. Yeah. Everett's the boss, dude. I learned so much from you. If you're listening,
It-
Greg, maybe you are, while I was sitting in the back of one of my classes. If I got bored, I would just throw on Catalyst Athletics and put on subtitles and listen to him coach at the same time. Because at the time I thought I was a good multitasker. Now I'm not at all.
yeah, that's funny. All right, Dr. Jacob Goodin, check him out. Go to his YouTube channel, type in CSCS, Dr. Jacob Goodin. It's going to come up. Sign up for his cohort in September. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Dane. It's been great chatting with you. Looking forward to the next time we can talk shop.
Absolutely. Peace.
Peace.